Imagine being woken by a sharp knock on your door in the middle of the night. You're arrested, but you don't know why. Was it a joke you told? A comment you made at work? For millions of people in the Soviet Union, this wasn't imagination. This was the reality of the Gulag, a system built on fear and suspicion. So, what were the actual official reasons a person could be sent to a labor camp? What laws were used to justify this immense suffering? Welcome to Sleeping Scribe. Here, calming history stories can help you relax and unwind. To find our answer, we won't look at the camps themselves, not just yet. Instead, we must look at the legal document that was the source of so much terror. It was the Soviet Penal Code, and one article in particular, Article 58. The Gulag was a massive state institution. It was not a system of pure lawlessness. Rather, it operated under a specific set of rules. These rules, however, were designed to be deliberately broad and incredibly flexible. At the very center of this legal web was Article 58 of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic's Penal Code. It was added to the code in the year 1927. This article was not created to prosecute specific, clear-cut actions. It was designed to eliminate anyone who could be labeled a counter-revolutionary. It was also used against those deemed socially dangerous elements. These were incredibly vague definitions. This vagueness was not an accident. It was the entire point. The article's full and ominous title was Article 58 on Counter-Revolutionary Crimes. Its creation was a key tool for political repression, especially under the leadership of Joseph Stalin. It gave the state a legal weapon to target anyone it considered an enemy. It allowed them to do so under the cover of law and order. To understand its power, we have to understand a strange concept in Soviet law. This was the principle of analogy. It meant that if a person's action was not explicitly illegal, it could still be prosecuted. If the act was considered similar or analogous to a recognized crime, that was enough. This legal loophole gave the state nearly unlimited power to interpret behavior as criminal. And the organ of state security responsible for these arrests was a feared and powerful group. They were known as the NKVD. It was the NKVD who would use Article 58 as their primary justification. They were the ones who would knock on the door in the dead of night. With this powerful and deliberately vague tool in hand, the state could interpret almost any human behavior as a crime. A simple mistake could be seen as sabotage. A private thought could be twisted into treason. Let's look at the most infamous and widely used clause. This was the charge of anti-Soviet agitation. This brings us to Article 5810. This section focused on anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda. More than any other clause, this was the catch-all charge. It was the most common reason for ordinary people to find themselves swept into the system. This law effectively criminalized speech. In some cases, it even seemed to criminalize thoughts. Its application was breathtakingly broad. For example, telling a political joke, known as an anecdote, could be enough. A simple, dark humor joke about a Soviet leader, if overheard by the wrong person, could lead to a 10-year sentence in a labor camp. The state had very little sense of humor. It also covered simple complaints. If you grumbled about long food lines or the poor quality of goods, this was not just seen as a complaint. It was interpreted as propaganda against the Soviet system. You were seen as undermining public morale. Therefore, you were agitating against the state itself. Praising any aspect of life in the West was also incredibly risky. A simple comment, like "American cars seem to run very well," could be reported. It would be framed as a slight against Soviet industry. It was evidence of a pro-capitalist mindset. It was therefore a counter-revolutionary statement. The reach of Article 58 to 10 extended even into the most private spaces. A diary entry, written in the solitude of your own room, could become evidence. If your private writings expressed pessimism or doubt about the future of the revolution, they were not just personal feelings. They were anti-Soviet documents. During a search, a discovered diary could become a one-way ticket to the Gulag. Even the books on your shelf could betray you. At different times, certain authors were declared forbidden. This included political figures like Leon Trotsky, but it could also include classic Russian writers like Fyodor Dostoevsky. Owning these books, or being known to admire them, could be presented as evidence of a corrupt and dangerous ideology. It was proof of your anti-Soviet thoughts. A paranoia was deep. This charge was so useful because it required no real evidence of action. It only required an accusation about words or attitudes. An informant's testimony was often enough. A personal grudge could easily be settled by reporting a neighbor for a supposed anti-Soviet comment. If simply speaking, or even thinking, could lead to a 10-year sentence, imagine the danger of being connected to someone else. What if you were linked, even distantly, to a person the state considered a true traitor? This brings us to the serious charges of treason and association. Here, we must look at another clause, Article 58(1). This defined treason to the motherland. Like the other parts of the article, its definition was dangerously elastic. Of course, it included acts that we would recognize as treason, such as spying for a foreign power or deserting from the military. But it went much, much further. For instance, having relatives who lived abroad could be considered a suspicious connection. It raised questions about your loyalty. Why did your cousin live in Paris? Did you communicate with them? This could be enough to trigger an investigation and potentially an arrest. The simple act of receiving a letter from a family member in America was a risk. Attempting to flee the Soviet Union was also classified under this article. There was no concept of legal immigration for most people. The desire to leave the country was, in itself, seen as a profound act of betrayal. If you were caught trying to cross the border, you were not just an illegal immigrant. You were a traitor to the motherland. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this law was how it punished entire families. A specific legal category was created. It was known by its acronym, CHSVR. This stood for Family Member of a Traitor to the Motherland. This was a formal charge. It meant that if a man was convicted of treason, his wife and even his children could also be arrested and imprisoned. They were not accused of committing any crime themselves. Their only offense was their relationship to the convicted person. This policy was designed to create a powerful deterrent. It made the price of dissent unimaginably high. You were not just risking your own life, but the lives and freedom of your entire family. The state made it clear that loyalty was absolute and that association with an enemy made you an enemy too. Alongside crimes of the tongue and crimes of association, there was another major category. These were economic crimes. Here we find Article 58-7, a charge commonly known as wrecking. This charge reframed economic failures as intentional acts of sabotage. It was a charge frequently used against a very specific group of people. These were the managers, the engineers, and the technical specialists of the Soviet Union. Imagine you are the manager of a new factory. The state has set impossibly high production quotas. The equipment is faulty, and the workers are untrained. When the factory fails to meet its target, the state needs someone to blame. It cannot be the plan, because the plan is perfect. It cannot be the leadership, because the leadership is infallible. So, it must be you. You are accused of wrecking. Your failure to meet the quota is not seen as a result of circumstance. It is presented as a deliberate, counter-revolutionary act of sabotage. You intentionally broke the machines. You deliberately slowed down production to harm the Soviet economy. One of the most famous examples of this was the Shakti trial of 1928. In this show trial, a group of mining engineers in the town of Shakti were put on public display. They were accused of conspiring with foreign powers to sabotage the Soviet coal industry. They were scapegoats for widespread industrial problems. They were forced to confess to crimes they did not commit, and the trial was used as a warning to all technical experts. Do your job perfectly, or you will be branded a wrecker. This idea was extended even further with another clause, 58-14. This dealt with counter-revolutionary sabotage, which was a slightly different but related concept. This could apply to almost any failure in any industry. For example, a farmer whose crops failed due to bad weather or a pest infestation could be accused. The state might argue that he did not take the proper precautions. His failure was therefore a deliberate act against the state and its goal of feeding the people. These articles, agitation, wrecking, treason, were the cold, bureaucratic reasons for being sent to the Gulag. They are the answer to our question, but they are an incomplete answer. A charge on a piece of paper cannot convey the human experience. So now, let us leave the world of legal code behind. As the formal language of the state fades, we will follow the story from a different perspective. We will follow the individual. Our focus will shift from the why of the law to the how of the journey into a quieter, more atmospheric world. It often begins with a sound in the deepest part of the night. It is a sound that does not belong. The distant, low grumble of a car engine, idling on a street that should be silent. For those who listened closely, it was the sound of the Chorny Voron, the Black Raven. This was the nickname given to the black cars of the NKVD. And when the engine cut out, a heavy silence would fall, a silence full of anticipation. Then comes the knock. It is not a polite tapping. It is a sharp, authoritative rap on the wooden door. It echoes through the small apartment, a sound that cuts through sleep and demands to be answered. The floorboards creak underfoot, a familiar sound that now feels alien and menacing. A family member might whisper, a hushed and fearful question into the darkness. But there is only one reason for such a visit. The door opens to men in long coats. Their faces are grim, and they do not waste time with pleasantries. One of them will produce a piece of paper. The quiet rustle of the search warrant is the only sound in the room for a moment. They are looking for anything. A book, a letter, a diary. While they search, the person whose name is on the warrant is told to pack. The moments are frantic, but strangely quiet. What do you take? A warm coat, a pair of sturdy boots. A small suitcase is filled with a few precious practical things. There is no time for sentiment. From another room, you might hear the quiet, suppressed weeping of a loved one. There are no loud goodbyes. Everything is subdued, as if the walls themselves are listening. Soon, it is time to go. The journey down the stairs feels unreal. Each step is a step away from a life that is now over. And then the front door to the building opens, and the night air hits your face. It is sharp and shockingly cold. It makes the world feel suddenly, intensely real. You take one last glance back at the warm light of your apartment window. Then the car door closes, and the quiet of your home is gone. From the familiar quiet of a home, the individual was plunged into the institutional silence of the state's prison system, a place of endless corridors and waiting. After the initial shock of the prison cell comes the journey, a journey by rail. The prisoners are herded into special train wagons. They were known as Stalin cars, named after a prime minister from the old Tsarist era. From the outside, they looked like simple baggage cars, but inside they were fitted with iron cages. They were dark and incredibly cramped. The journey begins with a sudden jolt, and then a slow rhythmic clatter of wheels on steel tracks. This sound would become the entire world for days, and sometimes for weeks. Clack, 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 clack. It was a constant, hypnotic beat that measured the slow passage of time. The darkness inside the carriage was thick, broken only by a sliver of light from a small barred window near the ceiling. The air was heavy with the low murmurs of other prisoners. They were strangers, packed together by fate. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing rumors or fragments of their stories. Most of the time, however, there was only silence and the endless rhythm of the train. Twice a day, the guards would pass out the rations. It was almost always the same: a dense, heavy slice of black bread and a cup of kiptok, which was just plain boiled water. The simple warmth of the water was a small comfort in the constant chill of the wagon. It was a moment to look forward to, a small break in the monotony. If you could press your face to the bars of the small window, you could watch the country slide by. The landscape was immense and overwhelming. You would see endless forests of birch trees, their white bark like pale ghosts in the dusk. You would see the sky reflected in the wide, slow-moving rivers. And then, as the train moved further north or east, you would see the first signs of snow. A dusting at first, then a blanket, until everything outside was a vast expanse of white that never seemed to end. Time itself began to feel strange and fluid. The sun would rise and set, its light briefly illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but days blurred into one another. Was it Tuesday? Was it Friday? It didn't matter. The only clock was the train's rhythm. The only calendar was the slow, imperceptible change of the landscape. For weeks, this rhythm was the only constant. It was the only clock. Then, one day, a new sound would replace it. It was the sound of silence, as the train's brakes screeched and it finally shuddered to a halt. The train had arrived at a small, remote station, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The doors would slide open, letting in a blast of unbelievably cold air. The prisoners would emerge, blinking in the pale light, their legs stiff and unsteady. Before them lay the taiga, the vast, silent, snow-covered forest of Siberia. This was their destination, a remote logging camp, one of thousands scattered across the immense territory. The daily routine in the camp was governed by the cold and by the roll call. It began before dawn. A bell would clang, and prisoners would stumble out of their simple wooden barracks into the frigid darkness. They would line up in the snow, their breath turning to clouds of mist in the air. The guards would count them, their voices flat and emotionless in the vast quiet. Then came the long walk into the forest. The only sound was the crunch of dozens of boots on the packed snow. The silence of the taiga was profound. It was a silence so deep it felt like a physical presence. It absorbed all sound and all thought. The work was simple and grounding. The felling of trees. The sharp, clean scent of pine resin would fill the air. The rhythmic sound of axes would echo in the cold. One axe, then another, creating a strange, scattered percussion in the great silence. It was grueling work, but it was also a task. It was something to focus on, a way to keep the mind from wandering. Despite the hardship, there were moments of strange and stark beauty. On clear nights, the sky would come alive with the northern lights. Shimmering curtains of green and purple light would dance silently overhead, a celestial spectacle in the middle of nowhere. In the morning, you might see intricate patterns of frost on the barrack windows, like delicate ferns made of ice. And sometimes in the fresh snow, you could see the tracks of a lone wolf or a fox, a reminder that you were not entirely alone in this vast wilderness. At the end of the long day, the prisoners would return to the barracks. The simple warmth of the stove inside was a blessing. It was a place to thaw frozen fingers and toes. It was a place for small moments of humanity. A fellow prisoner might secretly share a corner of his bread ration. Another might quietly, from memory, recite a forbidden poem by Pushkin, his voice a low whisper in the dimly lit room. These small acts of kindness were everything. They were quiet rebellions of the human spirit against the crushing weight of the system. They were proof that even in the harshest of places, humanity could endure. The prisoners learned to live by the seasons, not by the state's calendar. They watched the slow melting of the snow in the spring and listened for the first calls of migrating birds. These were the things that mattered now. In this immense space, under the silent watch of the stars, the official reasons for their journey faded in importance. The paragraphs of Article 58, the accusations of wrecking or agitation, all seemed like words from another world, another lifetime. What remained were the simple rhythms of existence. The cold of the morning, the warmth of the fire, the weight of the axe, and the taste of bread. What remained was the quiet resilience of the human spirit. It was a story not of laws, but of endurance. A testament to the simple, profound ability to wake up each day and to keep going, one breath at a time. And so, our journey from the cold text of the law to the quiet cold of the taiga comes to an end. We have seen how legal words on a page were used to justify a journey into silence and hardship. But we have also seen that the human story is rarely found in official documents. It is found in the shared warmth of a fire, in a whispered poem, and in the silent strength to face another dawn. Thank you for joining us at Sleeping Scribe. We hope this story has provided a space for calm reflection. May your own world be peaceful and your rest be deep.